Hello, football fans. Welcome to week 17 of the Scuffed Football Podcast. This is Noah. I'm Ted. We're here to cover last week, talk stories, scores, fantasy, gambling. Before we get started, I just want to say that we're trying to save a little bit of time because, life happens. So if you're looking just for gambling picks, those will get posted on Twitter later and you can follow us over there. As for the past week, I think the most reasonable place to start, obviously, is the Jags and the Texans. Both teams still hot. Both teams getting wins right before they go to face each other this week. I'm excited, dude. I don't know about you, but genuinely, I think this might be the first and last time in my lifetime that I can tell you that I'm excited for the Jaguars to play the Titans, and both of them just got good wins this past week.
Listen, I again, as of right now, technically the Jags would be in the playoffs, and I think we were both convinced that wasn't going to be a thing. So definitely interesting to see them come back. They've been playing great, and the Titans are sliding, so we'll see.
Absolutely. And Texans getting hot at the right time too. I mean, obviously they're still out of it, but if you're going to win some games, late season's the way to do it. So even though they're out of it, it's nice to see them be winning games and making things competitive. And the Texans are actually going to be involved in certain teams' playoff chances, which is the craziest sentence I think I've ever uttered. Maybe a better first place to start though, instead of joking a little bit about that one, would be the Cowboys and the Eagles. I think this is one of the premier matchups this season, just based on where both teams are, the fact that both of them still could potentially be the first seed for the NFC, and just overall being a really fantastic game. What were your big takeaways? What'd you see that you think is most notable?
Yeah, I mean, again, we went into the game knowing Hurts was out. Again, we've seen Gardner Minshew be stellar at times. We've also seen him be unstellar. So I wasn't sure what version of Minshew, we were going to get. But again, I think we saw just how good the Eagles' offense is in general. They were able to score 34 even without Jalen Hurts. And who could, himself could probably add, 3 touchdowns on top of that. So I mean, again, we're seeing the strength of the Eagles. Again, for the Cowboys, it's a good win. But I think it still is a lopsided win, I guess, because we didn't see the Eagles at full strength.
Yeah, I was pretty proud of the Eagles just being able to stay in that game. I mean, on paper, I think the Cowboys have a lot better skill, especially going to pick up a guy like T.Y. Hilton against an Eagles team that maybe has a couple of health issues, Jalen Hurts especially. But Minshew being able to lead that offense to 34 points, despite 4 turnovers from the offense, still putting 34 points on the board is pretty huge. But also, I think it's notable that the only 2 times the Eagles have been beaten all season long were when they had a game of 4 turnovers or more. I think the game plan against the Eagles then has to be, pretty cut and dry, is score a shitload of points and force them to turn the ball over. And I won't even say that this week from the Eagles with Gardner Minshew at the helm scares me as an Eagles fan, just because I thought that 3 of those 4 turnovers were just kind of fluky football plays, and the 4th one was pretty insignificant. That last fumble turned it from a 3-point lead to a 6. You still had to drive the field with a timeout. It didn't really make a difference. The state of that game was still very winnable for the Eagles. I know they lost it, but I think the Eagles fans have to go in and be super hopeful for what this means for the rest of the season. Alternatively, if we're going to talk about quarterback health issues, I think it's important to bring up the Dolphins again. For the 4th time this season, Tua has a concussion. First off, I pray for that dude every day of my life that his skull will be intact later in life, because, man, that's a lot to go through in a lifetime, let alone one singular football season. But I think them sliding against the Packers shows us, too, that maybe the Dolphins can't do it without Tua, and he is a really significant piece.
Yeah, I mean, again, we've seen the difference in how their backup, Brissett is versus Tua, and we're gonna see that again. Again, I think just Tua in general has that dynamic that the Dolphins need in order to win games.
Absolutely. I also have seen the 49ers continue getting better. So I think they had some pretty significant games over the past few weeks, but even against a team like Washington, I know they're a playoff team, but they may not be the most, forward, very good team The 49ers just looked so dominant the whole way across the board. They didn't let Washington look like they had any flair, any style, any skill whatsoever. I think it's time to start getting like scared of the 49ers in either conference, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Again, I said it before we started recording, but Niners Bills, let's see it.
I've said it most of the season that I think the AFC is better than the NFC. Whether it's the Eagles, the Cowboys, the 49ers, I don't think it matters who comes out of the NFC. I think the AFC is the top end of that league looks a whole lot better than the top end of this league. And I guess I just think that like the strength that I'm watching the 49ers have, and then how well they're playing, like they're getting better week after week after week. I think that it's time for even like Bills, Chiefs, Bengals to start getting scared of the 49ers. Like that's a defense and a style that you're going to have to overcome at some point if you want to get a Super Bowl. Like I don't think it's a free win for anybody. I know their record isn't as great as the Eagles maybe, or the Cowboys, even the Vikings, I don't think, but I think this is a team you really have to be scared of.
Yeah, agreed. They're winning games and they're doing it impressively. And, we didn't expect that, but I'm happy to see it. It's exciting. It's exciting football.
It really is. It really is. The last, I guess, big game that I was focused on this week was the Vikings and the Giants. We talked about it going into the week that it's most likely a playoff preview. I think the way things shook out on a very crazy weekend of football, it ends up that they won't. If the playoffs started today, they wouldn't end up playing each other. But it is still a very realistic possibility because the Giants are only a game ahead of Washington. Washington owns the tiebreaker, right? Am I going insane? Maybe. Regardless, it is still a possibility for the Vikings to end up playing the Giants. And I thought that was a much closer game than it may have looked just a few weeks ago. What are you seeing from the Vikings or the Giants that would motivate you one way or another through the playoffs?
Again, we've seen, I feel like recently we haven't seen the Giants be, on top of their game. I honestly expected that the Vikings would be able to beat, the Giants by more than 3. And again, even the last second, field goal. But I expected more from the Vikings. The Giants are still standing tall, I think, and it's good that they, kept it really close with, a team of the Vikings caliber. But I expected a lot more from the Vikings this week.
Yeah, I guess like there's so much talent on the Vikings that you have to hope they can push their way through the playoffs. They can flare that dominance and be better than most other teams. But I think the way this week shook out for them ends up being really good for the Vikings and really bad for the Giants. Like if things stand for the playoff push, the Vikings get Washington, who I don't believe match up as well against the Vikings. And the Giants end up getting the 49ers, where the Giants show that they can keep up with the Vikings. I think you'd rather play Minnesota. So just really interesting how all that's shaken out, and this win ends up being so impactful for the playoff picture.
Yeah.
With the playoff picture, before we get into much else, I just kind of want to talk about where matchups sit, what kinds of games it looks like we're going to get into. I know, obviously, the last 2 weeks of football can shake a few things up, but there's a handful of things cemented enough that we can start to get a clear picture. So we'll start with the NFC because I think it's a little bit more variable where teams can bounce around to. And the wrong teams getting hot at the right times to some extent. As of now, the Eagles still hold the bye, but if they lose out and Dallas wins out, then I don't know the tiebreaker necessarily between the two because they've both won a game apiece. But Dallas can still take over that first seed. If the playoffs started today, we'd be looking at the Vikings and Washington, the 49ers and the Giants, and the Bucs versus Dallas. First off, it's crazy to me that the Bucs still are going to have a home playoff game with a terrible, terrible record. But I think that, like, at least as it stands now, the first round would be pretty cut and dry as it is. I think the Vikings match up well against Washington. I think the 49ers look more dominant than just about anybody. And I think Dallas has proven all season long that they're significantly better than the Bucs. Any doubts, anything you disagree with me on, or?
No, if the playoffs started right now, I'd be swinging your way exactly. I just think again, there's the possibility again, but either way, I think those 3 teams are coming out. But
so the crazy part to me then, rather than the games as they currently stand, is the teams that are currently on the outside and still in the hunt. So Seattle, Detroit, and Green Bay are all within a game of the playoffs. If they manage to take a game up that the Commanders lose, we could realistically see any one of those three teams in the playoffs. I think those matchups all become super interesting because we've watched Detroit outplay Minnesota. They've won once. The second game they kept up really, really well in a game against the Vikings. Like, Detroit would be a super interesting matchup to take that last spot. Green Bay, I believe they're also split 1-1 with the Vikings. Without looking at my sheet, I'm 99% sure they've split this season. And Seattle, we've watched their offense be explosive when other pieces are in place. To know that they're that close, I think any one of those would make a more interesting run against the Vikings, and then also shake things up deeper on into the playoffs. Which team would you most like to see in? Which one do you think's most realistic? How do matchups change if it's one of those three?
Oh, God, I'd love to see another Lions-Vikings. I would love to see that. Again, obviously, we've already gotten it. It was a pretty good game, and I think the Lions would match up pretty well. I mean, against the Vikings, we've already seen it. It was a good game, so I'd love to see it again.
I certainly think that'd be the most exciting game. But I think the most notable storyline, for me at least, would be Green Bay. Simply because it's a dude with Aaron Rodgers' caliber back in the playoffs against a division rival when he didn't deserve to make the playoffs. I think it was after week 7 or 8 or something, I was reading this graph that they had a less than 3% chance to get into the playoffs, and now they're literally a game away with 2 weeks to go. Absolute insanity to me. And beyond that, I would be remiss in not saying that the Bucs also are not locked into the playoffs. Carolina can still steal the division from them, but I think that Dallas probably wins that game either way if all things stand. Even if Dallas overtakes the Eagles for that first round bye, I think the Eagles are significantly better than both of those teams as well.
Yeah.
Moving on to the AFC then. Currently, the top end, I think, is a little more ludicrous than the bottom end here. So we're going to start with the fact that the Bills have the bye. Chiefs, Cincinnati, and Jacksonville are currently division leaders. There's some weird teams here, but Chiefs or Cincinnati could both take over that bye still if things in the last 2 weeks shake out the right way. The Bills have better odds here just because of their wins this season, but it is worth noting that they're there. If the playoffs started today, then the Chiefs would face the Dolphins, Cincinnati would face the Chargers, and Jacksonville would face Baltimore. I'd say Jacksonville would face Baltimore. In my head, it sounded wrong, even though that may have been exactly what I already said. See, alternative to the NFC, though, I think these matchups become super interesting, and I don't think any of them are necessarily guaranteed. Chiefs versus the Dolphins, I think a lot of the Dolphins' strength, like we just mentioned, is based on Tua's health. If he's healthy and ready to go in a game against the Chiefs, I think that the Dolphins could absolutely put up a fight in that game, although I'd probably still take the Chiefs. Cincinnati and the Chargers. Chargers are getting hot at the right time. They've won 4 weeks in a row now. They've really made a push. They've looked really, really strong in their past few weeks. I don't think it's a free win for Cincinnati at this point. Jacksonville and Baltimore. Jacksonville has had a couple of very good weeks. They're one of the hottest teams in the league right now, but I also know that they've been really streaky all season where they've looked really good, then really bad, then really good again. So you can't necessarily guarantee what you're going to get, even with a home game against Baltimore. What are you looking at for these matchups?
Listen, I mean, I agree. So I think Chiefs, I think the Dolphins could put up a fight if they have Tua, but I'm still going Chiefs. Bengals, I don't know. Even though the Chargers are, winning some games, I still think the Bengals are just significantly better. And as of right now, we haven't seen the Ravens look any really decent, and the Jags are pretty hot. So I think the Jags would definitely win that. But then from then, then I think that's probably as far as they go.
Fair. I do think it's interesting the teams that are on the outside looking in. So the Patriots and the Jets are both a game back from that wild card spot. Both of them can overtake either Miami or the Chargers. Tennessee is also a game out, but I think it's more realistic that they win their division. I believe that it's more likely for them to overtake Jacksonville than it is for them to take one of the wild card spots, just based on who's there. And maybe a surprise is the Steelers are only a game out of the wild card spot. I knew that they had put a couple of wins together, but I didn't realize they were that close. I think health is going to get in their way, and I don't know that I'd pick them for any playoff wins, but I do think it's notable that they've put their season to the point where they're in the graphic at the very least.
I don't know. It's still the Steelers, man. Like, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I feel like. I mean, again, quietly they have been winning games. I'm not gonna. Yeah, again, winning. What was it? 13-10. It's not really that impressive to be, what I would hope would be in the playoffs. I want explosions. I like, shootouts, and 13 is not going to do it. So that's just me, though. But I mean, again, yeah, it's really good season for them after turning it around, and so it's good progress, though.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see the way the AFC finishes out. Like, I think the teams that are currently outside probably deserve to be outside. I know the Patriots have had a better season than expected, but they haven't really wowed us. The Jets have had a way better season than anticipated, and their defense is really good. But like you said, I prefer shootouts. And they've also lost a handful of games and looked really flat in games that they definitely should have won. Tennessee's had a skid, and I think Tannehill being out hurts them. Pittsburgh, like I said, it's sneaky that they are here, let alone like their ability to actually go and win some of these bigger games. So I certainly hope that the AFC ends the way it is, because I think we get better football out of it, but we'll see how that one shakes out. I just have a couple of quick things before we get into some last minute fantasy before championship weekend. First off, I want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the lower end teams, the Panthers and the Lions. What are we doing with their futures? The Panthers felt like they traded away all their pieces to rebuild, and now they're a game out of the playoffs, so you don't really have a high draft pick to do it. Doesn't feel like they have any solid quarterback options. What are the Panthers doing, man?
Listen, I mean, it's not really, that impressive when you're saying, when you're looking at the other records. I mean, like, again, we're seeing the Bucks as their division leader at 7-8. So, I mean, again, I think that it's still a rebuilding season. I think, trading away Christian McCaffrey, like, yeah, it definitely hurt them, even after winning that game after they traded. But I think he could have definitely gotten him a few games. I think they'd definitely be secured in that number one if they'd kept him, just because of the game changer he is. So I still think it's a rebuilding season, though. So I wouldn't read too much into it. I think they're showing a lot of spirit, but I still expect them to be better next season.
I guess it's just like with their records, right? If they end up surpassing the Bucks, they get like at best they get the 18th draft pick, right? If they don't take the division, they'll get somewhere like close to 10. It's just kind of crazy to me that like trying your hardest to make the playoffs at this point could sacrifice you the draft that you clearly need to rebuild for next season. It just feels like they're in a catch-22 where either way they lose, right? I think it's a weird place for them to rebuild because they have been having success in recent weeks. Very strange. The Lions, for me, kind of in the same boat. Like, obviously they've been having a really good season. I think that there's pieces to rebuild on. We talked a little bit last week about them considering a long-term option to Jared Goff, but also like when you can get big wins against teams like the Vikings and then you're losing to teams like the Panthers, like I think it's difficult to know what you've got or what you need to do. Is it coaching? Is it a line? Like I think it's really difficult to learn from these games when you're beating teams you shouldn't and losing to teams that you shouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's a little muddled, but I guess we're gonna kind of have to see in the next 2 days here, or 2 weeks here. So,
I also want to talk about the Rams because, look, they're very clearly in a place where they need some more pieces and they're going to have some difficulty rebuilding. But this week was a very clear highlight. I was telling Noah before we started recording, like, I didn't check out this game. I didn't watch it, not for a single second. I was looking at scores so that my notes could get updated. But the Rams scored 51 points. My big question with all this is, did Baker Mayfield, with his couple of games in Los Angeles, secure himself a job next season? Maybe not with the Rams, but somewhere at least.
I mean, I would hope so. I do think it actually would be with the Rams. Again, they don't have that, consistent backup. So I mean, I do think it would be in a backup capacity. I do think Matt Stafford is better. But I mean, I would love to see him again, and I think he's making it known that he belongs. So
I didn't see 51 points coming against the Broncos ever this season. And Baker Mayfield's only been on that team for 3 weeks, and the Rams managed to put it together. Like you can't take anything away from this dude. I hope that he gets himself a starting job somewhere. I don't care if it's the Jets or the Texans or wherever. Like, and truly, like, he's played a good enough brand of football in the 3 games he's done this year that, like, maybe he deserves a shot somewhere. I don't know that he's ever going to be Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes, but like, the dude deserves a starting job somewhere. He's better than a lot of the dudes that are playing that they're trotting out for the Jets every week. Like, the dude's got to play somewhere, man. I also want to talk about Derek Carr a little bit. We got the report maybe 2 hours ago at time of recording that Derek Carr is getting benched this week for Jarrett Stidham. We started talking about this a little before we started recording, but I know you mentioned you were thinking maybe they're just protecting assets.
Yeah, I mean, again, we've discussed when is the perfect time to start sitting. I mean, I think the Raiders, for the most part, know they're out of the playoff race. Like, I think now would be the best time to, rest the most important pieces. Let's not risk injuries, and maybe, get some experience for Statham, who could grow, So, I mean, again, I think that's the right move. Assuming that is the reasoning. I didn't actually watch the video where their head coach explained it, but yeah.
It's interesting to me because without any other insight, like, I haven't had a chance to watch that press conference, but I do think it's interesting. Like, first off, one of the coldest takes I've had on this podcast is week 1 saying that he was a sneaky MVP candidate. But I also think that, like, maybe they're just exploring other options. Like, genuinely, maybe instead of deciding to pay this guy or extending him any further, you figure out what you've got in a cheap young quarterback like Stidham and maybe see if Derek Carr is some piece that could go somewhere else. I mean, in recent years, we've seen a market for quarterbacks. We watched Deshaun Watson get traded. We watched Goff and Stafford get traded for each other. Like, there's clearly a market for teams to go out and get a big quarterback now. I wonder if they're not putting him up as trade bait maybe to decide that, like, hey, if he doesn't look bad for the last 2 games, maybe some team will still want him because the Raiders' offense has looked pretty flat. I don't know. I do want to go back and watch that press conference, and maybe we can do some follow-up next week, but I do think that it's a really interesting scenario for a guy like Derek Carr to get benched who's been a staple there for as long as he has. I think that's all we've got to talk about because we're trying to save some time. So we'll talk about some end of year awards next week. But I think the last thing we've got to talk about today then is fantasy. For a lot of people, this is championship weekend. If not championship weekend, then semifinals weekend. So what kinds of things are you looking at? Maybe some sneaky players, some last second pickups that maybe could help a team push them over the edge.
I mean, honestly, I feel like at this point, I've done some deep digging in our league, and there's really no meat out there. Like, I feel like everyone's picked up. Everyone's either in a lineup or it's just filling in for a week. So again, you can try to check and see who might have an injury for this week. But again, I feel like for the most part, everyone noteworthy is picked up. Just enjoy it, and let's see if you win.
I do want to just highlight because, like, I know there's been some quarterback issues that have come up in the past couple of weeks. I also know that this is the point in time where you may see some of those starters actually get benched. So the Bills will play the Bengals this week, right? If the Bengals end up losing that game, I think they're locked into the 3rd seed. Like, I don't think they can go anywhere. I think it also locks the Bills into that playoff bye that you may get to a point where Josh Allen or Joe Burrow isn't playing, and all of a sudden your star quarterback you've had all season long isn't going to play. I think the place to look for value like that is to start finding pieces from these teams that are in the hunt. The Patriots, the Jets, the Titans, they all need to make like late season pushes to get into that wild card spot. They're going to be playing their balls off, right? Same for Detroit, same for Green Bay. Like, you can look at these teams if it's just for a week or two, especially at the end of the season and your starter gets benched. Those are the places to look. Like, it'd be great to go pick up Jalen Hurts if he's somehow miraculously available in your league and they're benching Josh Allen, right? But in a situation where he's probably already on a roster, you could go look for a guy like Geno Smith. You could look for a guy like Jared Goff, who may have some more availability in your league. I think that's an interesting place to find some value if you're struggling with starters on teams getting benched. Like I said at the beginning, gambling we're going to save for Twitter. Just save some time. Life is happening. We got some places to be. I will say, though, for the record here, we both had pretty good weeks. Noah went 9-7. I went 11-5. That brings Noah to 105, 130, 4. Myself to 110, 125, 4. I think I'm really going to struggle to make up those last 15 games in the 2 weeks of picks we've got left. But just wanted to give you all an update where that's at. You can check Twitter for our picks for this upcoming week. Unless you got anything else I missed, I think that wraps us up for this week. So all in all, pretty quick one, but we will see you guys in the next week. And catch us on Twitter for those picks. Y'all have a good one.